Good afternoon and welcome back to the Hibs Observer, call it the afternoon briefing today, being as it is 20 to 5. Apologies for the late start, a little few technical gremlins preventing us from getting started this afternoon, but we're up and running and hopefully, fingers crossed, there are no more interruptions, technical or otherwise. I'm joined again by Craig Nisbet to take another look back at Saturday's 3-1 victory over Dundee United and a little bit of a departure from what we would normally do on the Monday show. This is, I suppose, a kind of more in-depth look at three individuals, um, which we will come on to shortly, who all played a sort of big part in the final result, whether they started the game or whether they came off the bench. Just a little bit more tactical insight that we were unable to cram into Monday's show. Craig, thanks for joining us again. How are you?
I'm good. I should probably admit that I pushed this back being late, and then Patrick got technical difficulties from it. So, yeah, we're both at fault there. But yeah, good to go. I'm glad we're getting to talk about this because it was a bit that I'd noticed in the game at the weekend. But I think we've done the right thing by splitting it up and giving this a little bit more time, because I know it's a debate that quite often comes in the pubs and in the stands and after the games about these players. So it'll be good to take a bit more of a deep dive into them.
Definitely. And just for anybody watching, this is obviously something that we can do a lot more of. So if you've got a particular desire to see more of these videos about particular players, how they impact games or what their role is, how they've performed in a specific match, for example, then do get in touch with us on social media or by email. I think my contact details should be on the Hibs Observer website somewhere. But it's something that we can do. It's a little bit of a departure from the norm, and it's always interesting. I think talking about the players from a tactical point of view, little things that you maybe don't notice at the game while you're kind of in the midst of watching Hibs in full flow. I mean, certainly having you next to me on Saturday afternoon, Craig, for the first time was quite eye opening for me, because there were certain things that you were picking up on that had just completely passed me by. So I think just a wee bit of insight there into what we can miss during the 90 minutes. Before we get started, just a quick word from our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, please do head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you will find the one for you at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Speaking of starting searches, I think Hibs have been in sort of process of trying to find a settled formation, or sort of players within that formation that David Gray has kind of found and adapting all the time. And one of those positions, I think, it'd be fair to say, would be the kind of attacking midfield role, in sort of just in between the midfield and the attack. I've got Junior Hoilett, Levitt and Josh Campbell in this graphic here. We are going to talk about Josh Campbell first. I feel a bit of a polarizing figure amongst the support. He's, I think, an interesting player in that he doesn't sort of conventionally fit that kind of number 10 role, but I would argue that he probably doesn't really conventionally fit a lot of kind of archetypal positions on the pitch. He's doing this sort of hybrid role, if you like, or I think David Gray referred to it as like an adapted playmaker role at the start of the season. But he came off the bench on Saturday, Craig. He did have quite a big impact, even though he wasn't on the pitch for a huge amount of time. And you want to highlight this because there's the eternal debate about, should Junior Hoilett start, should Josh Campbell start? Is there a kind of role for both of them? And I think what we've discussed this at length many times. And I think what we've arrived at is that there is definitely a place for both of them. Obviously, they can't both start, and David Gray prefers to use Campbell over Hoilett for certain games, and Hoilett over Campbell for others. But it's one of those things where it can be a shared role, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as the season's gone on, and when we changed formation, round about that sort of time after the Aberdeen game and went to a three at the back, we were obviously still keen to try and fit Hoilett into the team, because some of the only bright sparks in those dark days were some of Junior Hoilett's performances on that left hand side, when we were sort of in that more sort of 4-2-3-1 role, and him coming off the left and Obita coming down the left hand side. So Yes, it's interesting what you said at the start, because I think it's, and as we're probably going to see with the radar in a minute, that Campbell, it's probably worth taking stock on where he is at the moment. He's had 141 games for Hibs in his time. He's had 6 managers, which
Just
when
a
you
sec.
just the 6, which over that amount of time, that's almost sort of 23 games for, per manager he's had. And if you think about all the different styles of Heckingbottom gave him his debut in the League Cup. If he had Jack Ross, where he sort of maybe blossomed a little bit in that sort of role in sort of attacking midfield. Sean Maloney, Lee Johnson, Montgomery, and now at David Gray. That's not easy for someone to develop at that time.
And especially not when you're playing as many positions as he's played, because he has been.
And
He's been used as a sort of utility man, even though you don't get utility men anymore. I think we've just over the past few seasons, I think we've seen him at attacking midfield. We've seen him at left wing back. We've seen him at, I think we probably saw him at right back at one point. He does have that sort of. It's almost like his strength is his weakness, and that he's just kind of one of those players that you can put into any role and he'll sort of give you 100%.
And I think that's why it's worth taking stock, because he's had 6 years. If you think about those, how crucial those years are at coming through at 19, and he's 25 now. So those developmental years where you hopefully should be getting a lot of minutes and a lot of game time and getting regular starts in those positions, he's had different styles of play, different managers, different setups, and especially when he was under Lee Johnson, it was really hard to work out where he was playing, where he was appearing on the pitch. So I think that's important to take stock for him, because that's not been easy, and we said that at the weekend, that that's probably his biggest strength, has been his biggest weakness. And I know for him personally as well, there'll be bits that he would wish he's done differently and maybe wish he worked on a little bit more. But, in those 141 games, 19 goals, 14 assists, which, I think isn't a bad return at all, in terms of just what we've spoke about there, and the fact that he's had so much disruption in his Hibs career. And like you were talking about him playing different positions, going back to the Aberdeen game, he played a couple of different positions. He started off in that more a sort of left wing attacking role. He then went to drop back into midfield on the left hand side. Then he switched to the right hand side and sat in a midfield 3. So it is still a part of his game, and something that David Gray will definitely value, because you'll put him somewhere and he'll do a job. But it probably has come at the detriment of some other attributes that he's maybe sort of failed to develop over that time.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think you've kind of summed up there why he does sort of continue to be a bit of a polarizing figure amongst the support. I think there's some element of the sort of fan base that recognizes what he brings in terms of that kind of energy, and his kind of stamina really kind of works well with Gray's sort of pressing game. But I think there's times, and the player would say this himself. I think he did say this sort of midway through the season, that there was a wee bit of a drop off. In that sort of first half of the campaign. And, a lot of the talk last summer had been about how, he was, by that stage, he would have been, I think he would have just turned 24. And there was sort of like a lot of focus on him sort of taking on a more kind of senior role in the dressing room, not necessarily because of his age, but because of his longevity at the club. He's been there for a long time. He's come through the academy. And, I think when you look back to that sort of successful academy team that won the sort of league, and I think it was league and cup double, I think 2017, 18, round about then. He's the only one left from that team. And when you consider who he was sharing a dressing room with back then, the likes of Ryan Porteous, Ollie Shaw, Fraser Murray, even the likes of Kevin Dabrowski, I think, you maybe at the time wouldn't have looked at Campbell and thought, he's going to be the one who's going to, stay at Hibs the longest. He's going to be the one who's going to carve out, quite a nice career for himself. And if you look back at the friendly against Edinburgh City last summer, he, I think, captained the team in the second half. He spoke about afterwards about what Gray was wanting from him in terms of more of that kind of leadership. We see football teams now have sort of like senior leadership teams rather than just like a captain and a vice captain. And I think he sort of spoke like someone who was relishing this sort of extra responsibility. And then, I think he was taken out of the team, I think memorably, obviously not for him, but for a boy who's Ivy and for somebody who's come through the academy, to be dropped entirely from the squad for a derby must have been, a bit of a wake-up call for him. That would have been the 1-1 game in October, and that would have been, I think that would have been quite a wake-up call, and I mean, it's another topic for another video, but I think Gray's been very good at almost like these sort of short, sharp shocks to kind of reset players, like, dropping Boyle to the bench, taking Campbell out of the team. He's been rotating other players. And, I think, when Campbell came back, he was speaking about that and saying that, he hadn't been at his best. And what I thought was really interesting was that Gray spoke extensively about him in the summer and saying that he wanted, if you were kind of comparing attacking and defending, he said when Hibs are defending, you wanted to see Campbell in the box mucking in. When they were attacking, you wanted to see him in the box, getting on the end of crosses, second balls, that sort of thing. But then when he took him out of the team, he was speaking about him, that decision to take him out of the team, and I think. Bit of an interruption there. I think when he was speaking about his decision to take him out of the team, I'm trying to remember the phrase he used. I think he felt that Campbell was like trying a bit too hard to kind of make things happen, which I think is understandable. Given his given the fact that he supports the club, and he's like the rest of the players wants to kind of like have an impact, wants to change things, and I think that that can be to a player's detriment. If they're almost kind of too involved and not able to see the bigger picture. And Campbell's come back in, and I think certainly during the unbeaten league run, there were some games where he was hugely influential. I think back to that game at Pataudry where he had a hand in the certainly in the first goal. There were other games where he maybe wasn't getting goals or assists, but he was sort of pivotal in sort of key moments. And I think there'll be like a lot of players who want to be playing more than he is. Although you look at the radar there, and he has played sort of more games than the league average, sort of in total. And I think there are times when he looks. There are times when he looks better coming off the bench, and there are times when he looks better starting. And I think perhaps the problem earlier in the season was that Gray wasn't 100% sure which games were which. But what I think we're seeing now is games where he can sort of influence from the start, where he can influence coming off the bench. And we've talked about this with Kieran Bowie coming off the bench and replacing Kurevic, that it's not so much a player coming on for it's not so much a player playing 60, 65 minutes and then being replaced by a sub who's on the bench because they can't sort of really force their way into the starting lineup. It's about finishers, like Gray says. It's the team that starts is never the team that finishes. And I think whether you've got Hoilett starting in the 10 or Campbell, whichever one's sort of coming off the bench, is sort of almost continuing what the starter's done, but obviously with a slightly different slant, as we've discussed. But if we move on to Campbell's role in Saturday's game, you noticed as soon as he came off the bench a hand signal that I think we can see. Seeing the first image here that you sort of picked up on straight away.
Yeah, and just sorry, I'm getting some work done in the house, which is why I can hear these noises. But it's just like, see, when I actually took a wee look back, and it's really interesting because when we were in that sort of 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 at the start of the season, if you go back and he got 2 assists in the Premier Sports Cup and against Elgin in Queen's Park, and actually they're the most Hoilett-esque assists. There's like a deep cross in the left-hand sort of pocket that Hoilett always takes up for Martin Boyle's overhead kick. And then he slides Boyle through a deeper ball through for Boyle to come off the right-hand side to score against Elgin. When you look at his goals and assists this season, Motherwell is a deep run from midfield. Ross County, he wins the penalty in and around the box, but also it's a deep run from midfield as well. Assist against Aberdeen, it's a header in the box across the Triantis, and then obviously probably sums him up best is 2 goals against Celtic, that run from midfield, running in and getting the strike away and getting in and around the box. So I think he's always been someone, and I think I did an article on him maybe last year when he came into the team. If you remember, Marcondes got dropped when David Gray took over. I think it was against Livingston, and Campbell came in and he played that number 10 role, and my article was basically saying this is quite a big season for him in that position because he's capable. He's got that out of possession. He's brilliant. he's late arriving in the box. He's good at getting on the end of things. He's good in the air and things like that. But it's just that other little bit of his game that he needs to tidy up. And certainly at the beginning of the season, it looked like he had got that. Obviously, it's different caliber of opposition with the greatest of respect. But now his role, because of the new setup we've got, it has kind of morphed again. And he is sort of maybe being more deployed as someone that's more, he's in the team for what he does off the ball and what he can add when we get the ball wide, and now he can get into the box. So it probably does suit him a little bit better, but it's then when we're at home and teams are sitting deep against us, you probably do need the likes of Hoilett in there, which we'll discuss. But yeah, I know when that sub happened, people were maybe a bit, what's happening here? But when he came on, that signal, I think, was for, I think still Kurevich was on at this point, and Boyle to go as a 2. So my understanding would be that he's now come into almost playing a 3 with Triantis and Levitt, because Triantis and Levitt, when Trapanovsky and Middleton came on, they were getting dragged really far out of position. And we highlighted on Monday's video, like Dalby was able to get on the ball, and they were just, the big gaps between them were too much. So Campbell come on into that kind of number 10 role, and he's a bit more like a traditional number 10 in a midfield, that he, wherever the danger is, wherever the ball is, he's able to go across and do a bit of defending. As we know with Hoilett, he's more likely to stay out on the left-hand side. So yeah, if you go into the next clip, I thought it was worth sort of highlighting. He had quite a lot of involvements when he came on, and I do think it changed things a little bit, because it meant we had a threat in behind, or he was able to add a threat in behind. So in this example here, we've got Levitt playing the ball into Bowie. You can see Boyle's just moving off the back of the Dundee United midfielder there. If you go into the next clip, he gets a nice little 1-2, and you can see Campbell's the one staying high here, because when they play in a 3 as a 10, he can go high, especially if Bowie's dropping in. When Boyle picks up the ball now, if you go into the next clip, Campbell's able to sort of stay on the right-hand side. He dribbles down, and actually he puts in a decent ball. It's sort of cut out there just as it goes in towards the penalty spot, but it's a decent cross into the box, and I think that's what he gives you on the other side of the pitch. He's able to go on to the right and do this, and then as we'll see in the next clip, he'll be able to do this from the left-hand side as well. So again, the ball's fired in here. This is why Kieran Bowie's on for this sort of stuff here. He's able to hold it up. You can see Campbell already moving into that space in behind. If you go into the next clip, he gets the ball. And where I do think he has improved a lot is he's got a bit more confidence in carrying the ball now. And it's something that Junior Hoilett does, which we'll highlight later. Hoilett's unbelievable at carrying the ball forward and just gaining a lot of territory by just taking like little touches and getting here. And Campbell started to do it as well. So in this clip here, you can see he gets the ball in this position. And I think Josh Campbell of old would maybe look to come inside or go back. But if you go into the next clip, he actually gets himself right into the sort of opposition penalty box, and actually he makes the right cutback here. It's a really good pullback on his weaker foot towards Chris Cadden, and it's actually just sort of well cut out by, I think, Strain on the other side or Ferry on the other side of the pitch. So, that's just a couple of examples of why he comes on. That's why he comes on, for the fact that he can run in behind, he can carry the ball. Junior Hoilett can do it. He absolutely can, and we saw in the first half him doing it. But again, it's that doing it for 90 minutes is difficult for maybe the stage of Hoilett where he's at in his career. And also if the opposition change like they do, it becomes like Dundee United did and have more pace in behind. You do need somebody else that can drop back into midfield and defend like that.
Yeah, and I mean, another example here, just you talked about them playing in that 3 in midfield, and I think this sort of like sums that up. Sums up rather well.
Yeah, I just wanted to grab a still to just show that I wasn't making it up. But yeah, Levitt, Triantis, you can see Campbell central now. And what that allows, now that Boyle knows Josh Campbell can take that central role, he can then drift wide. And we obviously me and Liam have spoke before on as well, that Hoilett, Kurevich and Boyle do have quite a good chemistry. They do interchange really, really well. But actually, I think, when Bowie comes on, he's going to be the sort of target man, the focal point, and you want Campbell and Boyle running off them. So it does sort of give Boyle not a new lease of life, but something else. The defenders are maybe occupied more with Campbell and Bowie, and it lets Boyle maybe move in other spaces and cause more issues.
And I think we have, we've spoken about this before. I'm sure you and Liam have spoken about it before as well. But it's quite often it's not so much, is the individual going to bring X, Y, and Z to the team? It's what their presence means for like other players on the pitch, as you've just sort of highlighted here with, um, sort of it's an extra body in the middle to help Levitt and Triantis, as we were saying in Monday's show. There's not an awful lot in reserve for the two midfielders. You think, well covered in defence, options out wide, certainly plenty of variation in attack, but it's just that sort of like central midfield area where, I mean, with the best will in the world, Alassane Mane and Nathan Mariah Welsh, neither of them can come on and replicate what Levitt or Triantis do. And with
Yeah,
Quan out injured
and
as
do you
well,
know
that sort of
just
limits.
yeah, and the other thing you can see there as well is that up until Campbell came on, Dundee United were Triantis and Levitt were pulled quite a lot, but you see just Campbell's position in there. You've got two Dundee United midfielders there who now can't go and press aggressively on Triantis and Levitt because they've got somebody who's sitting in that number 10 role just behind. So yeah, like you see, him coming on, it definitely took it gave Levitt and Triantis just a little bit of a respite because they were getting pulled apart, and it just meant we could get our foot back on the ball again and start playing.
Indeed.
And then this is just another example again of and this would have been I said on Monday that I was delighted for Miko when he got his goal, but this was a nearly a brilliant goal from Campbell. And again, you can see he picks up the ball here, he pops it back to Cadden. You can see Bowie making that run in behind. If you go into the next clip, as it goes down the channel, it's brought back, and when it's cut back, you can see Campbell gets himself from that deepest part in midfield where he started to move up into this area here to get the strike, and it's a really good bit of defending. We actually thought it was maybe a handball at the time, but a brilliant bit of defending. But again, that's what Josh Campbell can bring. He's able to combine in that part of the pitch, and as I said about some of his goals this season and why he's in the team, the one thing he does have is he's got such an engine on him, and if he's coming off the bench 60 minutes for 30 minutes, he can run. He can just run so much. He makes those sort of sacrifice runs into the channels, but also he's adding this little bit of quality here, and he was really unlucky not to get a goal there. And that's the value he can bring to the team. So he's had two cutbacks that on another day we might have finished, and then he's obviously created a chance for himself in this position here as well, and as we're about to see, has a big impact on the goal as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we've talked about David Gray maybe not getting the credit he deserves for his tactical input to this team, and how he's improved individuals. Levitt's a good example. Triantis is another example. I think Kurevic is an example. Boyle. I mean, you go through the entire team, and I think you can, certainly for the players who were here last season, or for players who were maybe playing at the start of the year and then came out and they've come back in, you can see like such an obvious uptick in what they're bringing to the team, what they're putting into performances, how they're kind of combining, I suppose, with their teammates. And it's just there were times on Saturday. I mean, we said in Monday's show that it was just really like Hibs are fun to watch again. Like nine games out of 10, it'll be really entertaining. It'll be sort of fast. It'll be attacking. It'll be back to front really quickly. And I think it's something about Gray. I mean, it's the coaching staff as well that deserve praise for this as well. But I think it's been able to get a little bit more out of players and been able to sort of tell them exactly what he expects from them, exactly what he wants from them, and what they're capable of doing. And I think Campbell's maybe the sort of prime example for this. That he's maybe said to him, look, I know you want to be starting every game, but I think he's, as I said, he mentions it, saying, the 11 that starts is never the 11 that finishes. And I think Gray places a lot of emphasis on, it's a bit like, I think it's like in rugby, they call them finishers. And I think it feels a little bit like that with Gray, that, it's not so much having, like a starting 11 and then subs who can come on when, players are starting to tire or whatever. It's very much here's the sort of game plan for the first sort of 60, 65 minutes. And then when we get to like 65 to 75, we're going to change it up because I can bring on player X and player Y, and that means we can do this instead of that. And then sort of 75 minutes onwards, you can change it up a third time, you can do something different. And it's, certainly against a team like Dundee United, we talked again on Monday, Jim Goodwin talking about the injuries they've got, players playing with knocks, and certainly against some of the other teams that Hibs have faced. It's having the sort of strength and depth that they've got, and they've got the players available. You can get sort of 60 to 70 minutes out of Bowie. You can get, you can get the same from Levitt. Players who were maybe struggling to get, a lot of minutes under their belt for various reasons earlier in the season. And it's, I think when you look at the bench, it doesn't really matter who started. It doesn't matter who's, on the bench. It doesn't matter where, who you're playing, where they're playing. You look at that bench and you think there's a lot of options there. Maybe not in central midfield right enough, but in general, you look at it and you think there are so many options to change it up. If he wants to change shape, he's got bodies to do it. If he wants to, just keep playing the same way, but with slightly different players in there, you can do that. And I think it's, with Campbell, there's a few players who almost look more effective when they come off the bench. I think Bowie's maybe another one in that sense. That he has, he's started a couple of games. We know what he's capable of, but it's just that, it's almost like he can sort of take stock of the game. He can see what's going on, and then when he's coming off the bench to replace, usually Kurevic, he pretty much picks up where Miko's left off, and I think that's almost like the clamour for him to be starting is what he does in these sort of appearances off the bench. But at the moment, it sort of feels like he's one of those characters who, he's bringing more to the team by being an effective kind of finisher. And I think, with Campbell, it's almost the same, because it's just that, you mentioned his engine, you mentioned his energy, and that sort of, bit kind of like Duracell bunny, just being able to come on and just almost take advantage of a team, that's flagging in the last sort of like 5 to 10 minutes.
No, absolutely, and I think that's it. He's got this role in the team now, and especially having that time out that he's come back in, and he's his aerial abilities massive for us, especially if we have to go a bit more direct. And you're spot on in what you're saying. You're bringing Bowie and Campbell and guys like that on, Gale in the box, Nicky Cadden coming off, Lewis Miller coming on as well. It just gives teams a different problem to deal with, and the players have got slightly different movements, slightly different qualities, but they all still fit into that system that Gray's playing. And yeah, we recapped this goal on Monday, but it's worth highlighting because again, this is Campbell here, popping the ball off to Levitt. So again, just getting himself in and around the area, and I think you can see sort of Triantis to the side there. So there's that triangle. If you go into the next clip. Yeah, good, a great hold up play, and it goes in, and again there's Bowie, but this is what you get from him. He's not content with just bouncing the ball and letting this play out. And again, I'm not saying that Junior Hoilett wouldn't do this, but he's 34, and you're talking 86th minute of the game. You probably don't expect him to be able to kind of make those runs at the end. But again, this is what you get from Campbell, and if you go into that next clip, he obviously makes that run in behind. It's a well weighted ball. The next clip shows he tries to cut it back to Gale. It's not a bad ball. It just goes slightly behind him. Gale maybe going a wee bit too early, but he shows the composure once it sort of the deflection comes back to him. He takes that pause just at the corner of the 6-yard box in that next clip and rolls it into the path of Nicky Cadden, even though Bowie, I think, is screaming at him to cut it back there. And then, of course, from there, Nicky Cadden crosses it in and Gale scores. And I think actually having gone back and looked at Campbell and Hoilett, they're maybe not picking up the assists, the numbers of assists that you would maybe hope. But what they're doing is they're normally that like third, that first pass that creates the assist and then leads to the goal. They seem to involve themselves in that. And that a game away at Aberdeen, I remember I think it was Campbell's flick on that went through for Boyle, who cut it back for Yuan, and that was the goal. Mm-hmm. And then this goal here, this is Campbell to Nicky Cadden and to Gale. So yeah, the maybe it's not shown up in the data and the stats quite so much, and because they're playing 60 minutes a game, they're not seeing out the 90. It's probably hard for them to do well on those radars, but that's what we say. You take the stats with context and a pinch of salt, because across the league and across the team, we've got people coming on and filling in these maybe shorter periods of time, but they're being utilised in the right way for the benefit of the team.
I was really hoping you were going to use my favourite term, pre-assist, which I saw on social media this week was massively riling some people up. I think it was, I can't remember the context, but it was not going down well. I think there were several Sean Dyche memes with the utter woke nonsense caption. There were people, the usual, like the only thing that counts is goals. But I mean, that is, all joking aside, that is kind of what we're talking about here. We talk about key passes, we talk about these pre-assists, and it's, with football in the 21st century just being such a, like statistical game. It's so kind of technical in terms of, managers trying to get the edge in any way possible. So if you've got a player whose pre-assist numbers are very good, then that's why he's getting in the team over somebody whose pre-assist numbers aren't very good. Simple as that.
No, simple as that, mate. Simple as that. You should trademark that. But no, and it's that. It's again, it's just that it goes back to that kind of theme of it's just players being utilised at the right time for the right games. And I think throughout the season, Gray's done that really, really well. I think, the two surprising moments probably have been away to Rangers and sticking with Hoilett and Kurevich, and obviously that was a brilliant decision because we ran out winners in that game there, but that was a surprise. You thought you would maybe see Josh Campbell come in for that game. And then the change in Aberdeen, which was to put Campbell and Bowie in. But again, the rationale behind that, as we discussed, was sound. It just didn't play out the way that Aberdeen's game plan was just slightly better, and we kind of cancelled each other out and actually adding Hoilett into the game at that point, it didn't quite work as well as maybe if we had started the other way and added Campbell late on when the game was a bit stretched. But obviously they've learned from that. They went back to Miko and Hoilett on Saturday, and they got the benefit from all of them because you got Hoilett pre-assisting for the first goal, and then you got Campbell pre-assisting for the last goal. So job well done.
A great day for pre-assist merchants.
That's it.
I think as well, just we've got this sort of shot here, which is Nicky Cadden putting the cross in for Gale. But again, you see Campbell occupying the defender there just to ensure that Gale is going to be onside, and maybe it's intentional, maybe it isn't. But even if it's subconscious, it's just like another sort of wee kind of string to his bow almost. That sort of talking about talking about his game sort of maturing, talking about his becoming a bit better all round, and then in this sort of weird hybrid number 10 will be is it a playmaker role, is it something else?
It's interesting you point that out because I'm pretty sure he did that. He held them off against Rangers at home, and I'm also sure the Ross County when Levitt scored, he was part of that goal in some way, whether it was winning the header or holding the player off. And that's the other thing, in and around the box defensively from set pieces against, like he's always, he's great at winning the ball there. He's a really good body to have in the box, especially towards the end of games when maybe things are a bit more difficult. And obviously we know his threats up the other end as well. He's great in the air.
Indeed. We're going to park Campbell for the moment. May come back to him very briefly at the end when we're wrapping up. But we move on to Dylan Levitt and Junior Hoilett. We've talked about Hoilett quite a lot so far today. We talked about him on Monday's show as well. I mean, he's a very cultured player. He's sort of a really a real bonus for Hibs to have him as an option in that final third. We do actually have an article going out about his impact on the team that Liam has been working on today. So you keep an eye on the Hibs Observer tomorrow morning and social media channels. You can get a first look at that. Nothing too surprising, I don't think, but I think just really, really kind of highlights his importance to this team, what he brings, and he also addresses the question of one more year of Hoilett, which I think based on the last few games, you'd say it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. It's clear what he brings, not just on the pitch but off it as well, as that kind of experienced figure and just like a good character in the dressing room, which, as we know, Hibs are putting a lot of importance on at the moment in terms of getting players in the door. So we're going to look at, as I said, Dylan Levitt and Junior Hoilett. We're going to look at Levitt's radar first. What I've done here is I've got the individual radar and the second image is comparing it to the league average. I've done the same for Levitt and Hoilett. The thing that jumps out to me about Levitt's radar is that he's only played just over 10 full games this season. So obviously he's played more than 10 games, but just his combined minutes only works out as sort of just over 10 matches. And I think that's really a big reason for why his radar looks the way it does. Just to keep things basic, when you look at StatsBomb radars generally, the bigger and wider the radar, the better for different positions. You'll notice if we were to put up, for example, Lamine Yamal, one of his radars, it would look pretty complete, and not like this. But I mean, it's Craig. This is another example, really, of the stats not really telling the full story, because as we know, we know what Levitt's brought to this team. We know how effective he's been in the last few matches. But looking at this, it doesn't really tell us an awful lot, does it?
No, and it's an interesting one because I think he's, when you see the turnovers being, one of the highest things there, and you would maybe think deep progressions would be something that would be one of the things he's best at because of his role in the team. But yeah, he's not had as many minutes as he probably would have liked. But if you go and watch the game, you don't need the data to sort of tell you just what he brings to that team. And I noticed sort of, again, having rewatched Saturday, that now he's the one who tends to drop deep in the build up. Triantis tends to push on a little bit further forward as well. So he's kind of tasked with, if teams are sitting in a low block or pressing us quite aggressively, that he's the one who drops in with Rocky to try and get on the ball and make us tick and going forward. And him and Hoilett have built up a bit of an understanding in there, which we'll look at. But yeah, when you look at it, it doesn't make great reading, but you've got to take into account, similar to Campbell, that the 90 minutes that he's played, having played for the team, and it's again that thing about the data, that it doesn't always paint the picture. And that's why, yes, teams look at data, of course they do, but there's other bits to it as well, and what Levitt brings to the team maybe doesn't show up all the time on the data at the moment. It could do in the future when he plays more minutes. But certainly the way, when he's in the team, the way we're able to move the ball, it allows other players in the final third to be in better positions, to get better crosses in, to create better chances. And I think that's why I think him coming in, it took the weight off Triantis. I was feeling like everything was going through Triantis, and he's still a young guy as well, as is Levitt. It was difficult to always expect Triantis to create. And I think now that Levitt's come in to do that, it's sort of freed him up a little bit. And, when the two of them get going, they just can play everything 1-2 touch. And it's just so good to watch.
No, definitely. I think, we've seen quite a few midfield combinations this season. When you think back to the very first game of the season against St Mirren and Paisley, I think it was Joe Newell, and obviously it was a 4-2-3-1 back then, but I'm pretty sure it was Joe Newell and Nathan Mariah Welsh, I think, who were kind of anchoring the midfield, and I think Campbell's probably playing ahead of them. And then obviously you've had Kwon coming into some games, you've had Levitt in there, Triantis. I think, there's even been occasions we've seen the likes of Jordan Abita and Nicky Cadden in there as a kind of like emergency in some matches, just because, as we were saying earlier, there's not really anyone on the bench, whether it's Mariah Welsh, whether it's Alassane Mane, who can really come in and replicate what they're doing. But if we look at Junior Hoilett's radar, I think this is probably a bit more what you'd expect to see from him, and especially when you compare it to the league average as well. I think that tells its own story, really.
Yeah, he's like a joy to watch. And I think the way he's being used in the Hibs team, I mean, I don't know if it works for him personally, if he wants more game time and doesn't like, sort of dovetailing with Campbell. You don't know what he thinks about that personally, but I think we're getting the best out of him, and you can just see that through his radar. And yeah, everything he sort of, when he gets on the ball, he's a sort of bum out the seat type of player. You're excited with what he can do. The game seems to just slow down around him. The way he dribbles the ball and just stops and starts opposition players, it really is a joy to watch. He's been a really good pickup this season, and I think he's maybe 4 goals and 3 assists, I think, for us this season. But he's probably got a lot of pre-assists in there as well. And I know at Aberdeen it was sort of like 2 goals and 9 assists. So he's still capable of playing at this level. And I think the fact that the way David Gray's been utilising him has probably been and you bear in mind this season, it's not been an easy season, especially at the beginning. And I'm sure he picked up a wee injury as well. So he's not had like a full campaign, but he's been fantastic, and we'll have a look at a couple of like specifics just from the weekend of what he's able to bring to the team.
And just before we move on, I mean, you look at the 90s played there, 16.5 for Hoilett, 16.2 for like league average. So he's kind of there or thereabouts, in terms of league average, which maybe indicates how good his numbers are. But I think as well, looking at I'm just looking at like the pressures in there as well. Like that's significantly above the league average. And I think it's also worth remembering as well. Like he was brought in, and I think everyone thought he's going to play as a winger. He's going to play that sort of like left-hand side in a 4-2-3-1. Potentially kind of alternating with Eliuan if he was if he was still at the club. And I think he did start off playing that sort of like kind of wide left role, but with a change in formation, it's again it's Gray the tactician. It's how do you get the best out of the players you've got at your disposal, and it's if there's not an obvious place for them, if you're not, I mean, you're not going to be asking Junior Hoilett to be playing left wing back every week, but it's how can you get him into the team? How can you utilize what he brings? Which again we're about to look at, but sort of flitting him into this. I mean, again, we talk about this sort of hybrid role for Campbell. It's almost like that for Hoilett as well, where he's just got this kind of free role in that sort of final third. Just it's the sort of cliched license to roam. It's just okay, go and do your thing, because we've seen him going out wide left and like the goal he scored against St Johnstone, like going out wide left and then just curling one into the far corner. We've seen him kind of patrolling the area between midfield and attack, and especially the pre-assist. We're going to get banned. The pre-assist for Boyle's goal on Saturday, that pass to Cadden, and he's just the way he can create space for himself and sort of bring others into the game as well. So if we move on to, I mean, you highlighted before, I think, how Levitt and Hoilett have sort of, I suppose, gelled since they've been getting a run of games in the team.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt, like I'm ashamedly a big Dylan Levitt fan, and I do sometimes when he played before, the issue he had is he got on the ball, he looked up, and there was almost always not a lot ahead of him to aim at, and I think you can see more recently just the way we're set up and the structure. We speak about out of possession, we get bodies around the ball, but even in possession as well, we're never too far from each other now, and there's always somebody to link. And we saw a couple of clips of Campbell doing it in the second half there, but Hoylett's just like a master at it. And I think especially the first half on Saturday was a wee bit of a masterclass in that position. And yeah, you touched on the goal when he gets into that space and just threads the ball for Chris Cadden, and who cuts it back and Boyle scores. But yeah, just like examples like this that they might go unnoticed in the game, but Levitt fires a ball in there, and if you go into the next clip, as always in these positions, like players are pressured. They're always under pressure, and especially Dundee United sort of set up sort of similar formation. But Hoylett's just got so much ability. He uses his body so well, sort of McGinn-esque, I suppose. But he takes the contact. He's able to stay on his feet there. He knows he's sucked the player out of position. And if you go into the next clip, he then carries it close enough to kind of get the sort of left-hand side, the left wing back, kind of interested in, do I now go across there? And he just opens up enough space just to play in that ball to Chris Cadden to then advance the attack. And it seems like a little small thing but again, it just gains you territory up the pitch, gets you into that position. And I think, at this point, Chris Cadden tries to play a ball down the channel for Boyle. So, from Levitt to Hoilett to Cadden, and then suddenly we're in behind the team. But it all starts from if you're not good at holding the ball up in the middle of that pitch, you lose it there, you're open to a counter-attack and likely probably a chance, at least a shot on goal from there. And if you go into the next clip, even here, this is we talked about him and Obita having quite a good link on that side, and you can see, again, this is Levitt, as we touched on, dropping into this. So we play with a back three, but quite often Levitt drops in like this, and O'Hora Miller or O'Hora will push up a little bit higher, and it forms a back three with Rocky and Iredale. Obita's high there, you can see as well, and you can just see sort of the Dundee United right wing backs looking out at Obita there, just keeping an eye on him. The Dundee United midfield is sort of, they're tight together. They're a wee bit across, but Levitt's pushed out. The strikers are probably being told to stay on the centre half, so they're not going to want to put any pressure on. And you can just see Hoilett just comes into shot, just dropping into that little space. If you go into the next clip, he drops in there, and you can sort of see the Dundee United right centre back pointing to be like, I'm not going out there, because that leaves too big a space.
You can actually see the alarm in his gesture. Like, you can see that he is alarmed.
And you can just see I never highlighted him, but it's actually Martin Boyle, who's I think just the closest player there to him. And you can just imagine if that right wing back, the right centre back, pushes out towards Hoilett, Martin Boyle's running in that space behind Declan Gallagher, in that example, to go in. So, and you can see then that's the trigger for Obita to go forward as well. So again, and that's just where this is, and it's not to say that Josh Campbell can't do this, because he's shown flashes and moments, and against maybe lesser opposition, that he's able to do this, but Hoylett's able to do it sort of more consistently, and that's why when you're at home and you're going to be on have a bit more of the ball, and you're going to be in possession, that's probably why he still gets the nod. And actually, and I think if you go into this next clip, what actually happens here is Hoilett carries it forward, carries all the way. He stops, starts, and he gets into this position here. And you can see he's got three players round him. He could slide Obita into the left. He could cut back to Boyle. And I actually think he tries to clip towards the back post for Chris Cadden. And so even at his age of 34, teams are still very worried about him and what he can do in possession. And I just thought that was another good example of what he can do, because it's not just he's a number 10 that just sits and gets the ball and moves it on. He's more than capable of carrying the ball forward, and I'd argue that's almost where he's most dangerous. He does have his moments where he takes one or two too many touches and gets it pinched, but the good far outweighs any of the bad with him at the moment. And I think if he's going to stay, I would love him to stay. I would give him another year, especially if he was content at being involved in this sort of hybrid role of being part of the team some weeks and some games not. And if we do get into Europe and you're looking at your squad, you need guys with his caliber and his quality and his experience for not just for the domestic campaign as well as a European campaign.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I think you did mention this earlier, just playing the ball into him and he's sort of holding it up well. I think when Campbell came on, there were actually two or three times sort of shortly after he'd come on where Hibs tried to do the same thing and the ball wasn't sticking, because it's not really, I mean, as we saw later on in the game, he has his moments, but it was actually quite interesting that you could actually hear the crowd getting a little bit anxious. It was still 2-1. Hibs had their chances, they hadn't taken any of them, and there was this sort of kind of panic, like, Hoylett's gone off, that's it, we're doomed. But I think it's, we talked on Monday about David Gray having like nice headaches in certain areas, and it must be a bit like that with kind of Hoilett and Campbell. Like, who do you start? Who do you bring off the bench? How long do you give them? I think back to some of the games during, I think the start of the unbeaten run, and Hibs were winning games. Hoilett wasn't even getting on the pitch. And it's just one of those things where you look at how the team sort of like evolved through the season and how it's changed. And again, we focused on maybe how some of the younger players have been like coached to give more, to sort of bring more to the party. We talked about Triantis. I think Lewis Miller's probably another one. Trying to think who else. Dylan Levitt, I think, another example. And it's probably to be expected with with younger players, but I mean, even then, with the likes of Martin Boyle when he was taking out the team, and you look at how much impact he's had since he's come back into the team. He's sort of taken on that talismanic role again, and even at 34, there's no reason why Hoilett can't be looking to improve what he does. Um, Lewis Stevenson always used to say this as the kind of elder statesman of the team. For a kind of good few years, that he was still learning. Like even having been in football for 70, 80 years, whatever it was for him. That's what it felt like anyway. He was still learning and still sort of trying to improve, still seeing what he could do better at. And I think just going back to Gray, I think it's really noticeable how he's sort of got he's got the best out of so many players who maybe were struggling to sort of show their best to begin with. And I think you look at, I mean, Mariah Welsh is another one. I know he's not maybe played as much recently, but like Levitt, there was a time where he just seemed to be so far out of the picture, and then he came back in, played a few games, did well. Was having an impact on games, and I think that's what when you listen to what Gray and what the players are saying about the togetherness in the dressing room, and you've got players who maybe aren't playing every game, they're maybe not getting off the bench, they're maybe an unused sub more than they're getting on, but there's not really any sort of outward grumbles anyway. I mean, nobody likes not playing, but I think they recognise that it's they can see the bigger picture, and I think it is a kind of longer term sort of project, not just a kind of a short term thing. And I think
Yeah,
that
I think you're right.
applies to so many of the players, and even the likes of Alassane Mane. We've obviously not seen a lot of him, but again, it's just sort of Hibs could have waited until the summer to sign him. Instead, they sort of get him in January just to just to kind of accelerate that kind of acclimatization to Scottish football, which ideally will help him hit the ground running in pre-season. Same for other players who maybe missed pre-season. They've kind of been managed so that they can have a big impact from the start of the next campaign. So it's we're seeing that with younger players, we're seeing it with established players, and we're seeing it with the kind of new signings. And I think it's been sort of quite well managed by Gray and the coaching staff.
Yeah, it has been. It's funny going back like through Campbell, like looking at some of Campbell's goals. It was sort of like, Mariah Welsh started against Celtic and actually was part of that. The build up to Campbell's goal, and when I look back at some other Campbell's moments, it was Ellie Yuan, playing in the front two with Boyle that sort of seen us through many weeks when like Kieran Bowie and Mikola Kurevich were both injured, and yeah, people have come in at different times and stepped up. And I would say sort of January onwards, it's been more settled, and there hasn't been as much change, but there's been these odd, when Newell being injured and Kwon being injured, Levitt came back into the team and has then been playing pretty regularly since then. And obviously we've got this little sort of dovetailing with Hoilett and Miko and Bowie and Campbell, and it sets us up for a really good finish in the season. But it's when we look at, I think your article when you talked about like the last dance element of it, and when we spoke about the strikers and the forward line, there's going to be big change in the summer, because they've got players out of contract, people retiring potentially, people just going to leave maybe for a transfer fee, loans returning. I think Kieran Bowie could be our only striker at the moment. If Venti and Yuan gets sold and Miko goes back to Swansea and Gale retires, etc. So I think for having guys like Hoilett and being able to tie them down just for another year, Campbell will still be there, and again, your midfield, because Triantis will go, Kwon will go back to Celtic. There'll be all these changes, and Mane's going to hopefully come in and fill a bit of a void in there. And obviously we've got Rocky's contract situation as well. So it's actually like that front end of the pitch is really interesting. And in terms of how it's going to go in the summer. And I do think, for this, if you do get into Europe, the squad is massive. And I think the way that Gray's certainly rotating players and using them now is hopefully giving us a good foundation that if we are successful in Europe and we get our recruitment right, we'll be able to sort of manage that season, because it will be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Just before we go, just a comment here, which I think is probably, I've had this feeling at times. I don't know if it was green tea, but Josh is treated by the fans as Lewis Stevenson was for most of his time at Hibs. Time Josh was appreciated more. I don't disagree with that. I think, rightly or wrongly, I think football fans of any club need a scapegoat. They might not realize that they need one, but they need a scapegoat. There needs to be someone who is the kind of whipping boy, the sort of, if things aren't going right, it's, if things are going bad, you've been on a sort of, a run of games without a win, and things are looking a bit bleak, then you tend to see threads starting on message boards that kind of rack up the page numbers, and it just sort of turns into a bit of an argument about what a player brings to the team, and why they shouldn't be playing, and why they should have been let go a long time ago, that sort of thing. And we've seen it a few times with Hibs players, but I think this is probably, I think it's a fair comment. It's, like I say, it's one I broadly agree with. But I think he I mean, it goes back to what we were saying at the top of the show, that I think he maybe suffers a little bit from not having this defined role. So it's sort of like, well,
Mhm.
he's not going to be sort of, he's not going to be an out and out, attacking midfielder. He's not going to be an out and out central midfielder, defensive midfielder. He is this sort of. I think he's moved away from that sort of utility figure, and I think, again, that looks like really good coaching by Gray, who I mean, Campbell spoke last summer, and he kind of hinted that Gray's always kind of batted for him, and been in his corner, and sort of spoke up and said, with previous managers, like, Campbell deserves a chance in that position. But I think, it's maybe a way of getting experience into him, where you say, yeah, we're struggling for a left wing back. Let's put Josh Campbell in there because he can do the role. We need somebody at right back. Josh Campbell, can fill that role. But I think, what Gray's done this season has been quite kind of clever, in a way of just kind of giving Campbell. I mean, again, we've talked about it. We've called it a hybrid role. We've said it's this sort of, it's neither one thing nor the other. But I think he's allowed Campbell to kind of really focus on that one position, and sort of improving the sort of, the particular skills for that position. And I think, what we're starting to see is, when he is coming into games, and he's, picking up where Hoylett's left off, like we've just discussed in this show, the impact he's had on, the final sort of, I think it's sort of 20 plus minutes, when he had an injury time that he was on the park. And I think that's, you know, it's still happening to some degree, but I think we're seeing less of the Josh Campbell who, maybe just runs around a lot, and gets stuck in. And we're seeing more of a kind of well-rounded player, and you can see what he's bringing to the side. You can see how he's sort of, impacting other players. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, 100%. It goes back to, I think he is sometimes, sort of maybe mistreated by the fans, and I think, it's got back to the top of the show. I mean, he's had 6 managers and 140 games that he's played for the team. He's been, there was times they were trying to play him deep midfield, almost in that Dylan Levitt Triantis role, which, he really struggled to play in that. And he's always been someone, since he broke through in the team, that he is a good runner in behind. He's great at arriving in the box. He's great in the air, and that's his strengths. And I just think we've sort of failed to give him some consistency with that. And yeah, I'm sure he reflects, and there's bits of his game, as you said, he's always learning. He's still got years in him, and you'd hope this season that he's with Hoilett, he's hopefully learned, how to, body shape, getting in front of the ball, holding it up, and adding that to his game, carrying the ball as well. So he certainly has maybe not looked the greatest season in terms of numbers. He had a season where I think he hit 9 goals and 5 or 6 assists. It's not been quite as fruitful as that one, but I would say, even though maybe the stats don't show it, he's certainly, I think he's come on quite a lot this season in that role. And he's got competition. You've got Molotnikov that, coming through, who's looked great and when he's had his moments in his games as well. So he knows that competition will be there, and especially if Hoilett stays as well. So it's an exciting time for him. But he's always somebody that I think is very useful for the squad. And yeah, hopefully this has done something to, maybe for some fans maybe on the fence, to sort of maybe appreciate some of the stuff he does, because quite often it maybe does go unnoticed.
I think you're right. I also think we'll probably get more complaints about our overuse of the word pre-assist, than Campbell's influence, but we can stay optimistic. But I think we will call it a day there. We've been talking about Josh Campbell, Junior Hoilett, and Dylan Levitt for the best part of an hour. Thank you, as always, to Craig for joining us to just give us a bit more insight into how these players are impacting Hibs on the pitch. Thank you for watching, and just another reminder that we do have a big read about Junior Hoilett going up on the Hibs Observer website tomorrow morning, so do keep an eye out for that. If you haven't subscribed to the site yet, we are still running our £1 for 6 months offer, which gives you access to everything we do. So hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. Your support hugely appreciated, helps us to keep on bringing you videos like this and all the content that we do on the website, from exclusive interviews, all our match day coverage, and tactical pieces as well. And we'd also appreciate it if you can like and subscribe our YouTube, to our YouTube channel as well. Free to do it. You get alerted every time we do one of these videos, every time we post from a post-match press conference and beyond as well. So thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and we will see you again soon.